Millionaire is surprised by a little girl asking for a hug. It was supposed to be just another summer night in Strasbourg. The lights of the night market danced across the ancient cobblestones, as if the entire city had been bathed in liquid gold. The scent of cinnamon, fresh fruit, and charred wood wafted from the craft stalls, while tourists and locals alike lost themselves in laughter, violin melodies, and time-stopping flavors. It was right there, between a wooden toy stand and a flambéed crepe stand, that it all began. Lucas Meyer, a 38-year-old German businessman known for his coldness in business and lack of a personal life, was walking distractedly. His steps were firm, his gaze distant, as if every movement followed an invisible schedule. He wasn't there for pleasure. A meeting had been canceled. The driver was late. Impatient, he decided to walk. Little did he know that it wasn't he who had made the decision. Lucas was the kind of man who made time seem like an investment, not an experience. He lived between airports, closed meetings, and million-dollar decisions. He never allowed himself to be surprised. Until, between the shadows of the hanging lanterns and the soft sound of a street musician playing the accordion, a small voice changed everything. "Young man, can you give me a hug?" He stopped. The request didn't come with tears or drama, just huge, sincere brown eyes. The girl was no more than 6 years old. Her hair was tied in 2 braids. She wore a worn-out dress. Her sneakers had loose soles. But there was something about her that Lucas couldn't explain. A glow, an emptiness, a familiar echo. He frowned, confused. He looked around, expecting to see an adult approaching, perhaps a mother, an older brother, someone to interrupt this surreal moment. But no one came. Just that child, standing in front of him, with his hands clasped behind his back, and a look that pierced certainty. "I don't want money. They've already given me coins. But no one gave me what I really asked for. I just want a hug, like the ones parents give their daughters." Lucas felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't shock. It was dizziness. As if, for a second, the ground had disappeared. And inside him, an old hole, one he'd spent his whole life pretending didn't exist, had opened up again. His body reacted before his mind could stop it. He crouched down, a little awkwardly, and opened his arms. The girl threw herself against him as if she were returning home. A long hug. Tight. Silent. Lucas's heart was beating fast, without rhythm, as if he were relearning how to live right there, in the middle of the illuminated square. And that's when she appeared. A woman with her hair tied up in a floral scarf, her fair skin marked by fatigue and dignity, walked quickly among the people. She stopped when she saw the scene. Her expression carried distrust and protectiveness, but there was also a trace of surprise, perhaps even gratitude. "Sophie?" she asked, her voice firm but soft. The girl released Lucas slowly, as if she wanted to prolong the moment. She looked at her mother, then at him, and whispered, "He smells like vanilla." Lucas was silent. The woman was too. It was one of those seconds that lasted longer than they should. An exchanged look, full of voiceless questions. He stood up, gave a polite wave, and started to walk away. But something inside him had already changed. He knew it. That night, Lucas Meyer didn't win a contract or close a big deal. He didn't meet a goal or expand his company. He just gave a hug, and because of that, his life would never be the same. Lucas didn't sleep that night. That girl's embrace stuck to his body like perfume on fabric, impossible to ignore. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt her little arms around his neck, and above all, that phrase that sounded like a key opening doors that had been sealed for decades. "I just want a hug," just like the ones fathers give their daughters. But Lucas never knew what it was. He tried to ignore it. He went back to the luxury hotel where he was staying, lay down on a bed that cost more than most people's monthly rent, turned on the air conditioning to the exact temperature he used to choose everywhere in the world, and still he found no peace. He felt invaded. as if someone had opened an ancient closet inside his soul, and the ghosts he had hidden, organized, locked away, had escaped without asking permission. In Lucas's childhood, hugs were non-existent. He grew up in a cold mansion, devoid of affection, the only child of an inflexible banker and an absent, almost ethereal mother who disappeared before he turned 9. His father believed in rules, discipline, and meritocracy. Showing affection was considered weak. Crying was forbidden. Saying, "I love you," was unthinkable. Lucas learned to adapt to silence, to become an adult too soon, to be efficient, logical, and impassive. He grew up accumulating diplomas, figures, properties, achievements, and emptiness. But that girl, with her absurd and simple request, had broken the bubble. And not with shouts or demands, broken with a gesture he never received. In the middle of the night, Lucas got up, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself. For a moment, he didn't see the CEO. He saw the boy who had never been hugged. The next morning, he tried to get back to his routine. He called his driver. He went back to his schedule. He made 2 video calls with Berlin, 1 with Singapore. He signed contracts. But nothing seemed real. The voices sounded distant. The pixelated faces on the screens made him nauseous. At the end of the day, he canceled his dinner with investors and instead went down to the hotel bar. He ordered a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it. He stared at the glass as if there was something deeper than alcohol inside. And then, without really knowing why, he typed into his browser, Strasbourg Night Market, calendar. He scanned the screen until he found the name of the exact place he had been. And there, as if fate were laughing at him, was the sign. Artisan market open every day until the end of summer. Live music. Free entry. He closed his notebook slowly. His heart beat strangely. During the week that followed, Lucas tried to rationalize what he was feeling. He was just a child, he thought. A poetic coincidence. An emotional interruption. But at the same time, an insistent question sprouted in his mind like weeds. Why did that affect me so much? And then, one Saturday night, unable to resist, he returned. The sounds, the smells, the lights. Everything was the same, but he was different. He was searching without wanting to show that he was searching. He looked among the stalls, pretending to be interested in the handmade soaps, the paper lamps, the hand-painted pictures, and then he saw, there she was, sitting on a low stool, a sheet of paper on her lap, and colored pencils scattered around. She was drawing with concentration, her tongue slightly hanging out, the way children do when they are completely immersed in something they love. Beside her, a woman stood selling beaded bracelets, beaded necklaces, and small watercolor paintings. It was the same woman from the other night, his mother. Lucas stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. For a moment, he considered leaving. But before he could decide, Sophie looked up, recognized him, and smiled. "It's the boy who smells of vanilla." His mother looked up. A second of tension, then a restrained nod. Lucas took a deep breath, walked over to the stall, and bought a bracelet. No one said much. But there, between the distant sound of the accordion and the soft glow of the lanterns, something silent and deep was rekindled. Lucas decided to go back to the hotel, and the next day, he decided to go to the small market again. He had returned to the place where it all began, not because he wanted to remember, but because he needed to feel it. That night, the sky over Strasbourg seemed clearer. The stars were visible, and a gentle breeze cut through the typical summer heat. The stalls at the night market began to light up, one by one, as if the city had turned on small lights to chase away the darkness. Lucas walked slowly, unlike the hurried man who had been there the week before. He was dressed in simpler clothes, had left his expensive watch at the hotel, and for the first time in a long time, his phone was turned off. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but he knew what he was looking for. In the distance, he recognized Eva's tent. She had her back turned, arranging the cloths on the table. Her hair was tied up in the same floral scarf as last time, her gestures meticulous as someone who made little into enough. Beside her, Sophie was drawing in silence. She was sitting on the same low stool, her knees dirty with chalk and her forehead furrowed in concentration. Lucas stopped a few meters away. He observed the two of them for a while, without being seen. There was something sacred in that simplicity, a kind of beauty that he had never understood in the numbers and goals he had lived with his entire life. When he finally approached, Ava turned around. Her gaze was direct, firm, neither fear nor sympathy. Just one question. Why did you come back? Lucas didn't respond with words. Instead, he pointed to the bracelets on the table. He chose one made of green and brown beads, simple, almost childlike. She took it, named the amount, and he handed her the money with a restrained gesture. For an instant, their fingers touched, and something almost imperceptible passed between them. A spark, perhaps a silent memory. "Hi, young man," Sophie said, smiling without looking up from the paper. "Today I drew a dragon that lives in a tree. He only breathes fire when he's sad." Lucas bent down slowly. "And why is he sad?" "Because he misses the wind." She looked up, serious. "Sometimes we miss things we never had, you know." He swallowed hard. "It's true," Lucas replied, with an almost imperceptible smile. "Sometimes, that's exactly what hurts the most." Eva watched him in silence. She still didn't trust him, but she didn't push him away either. In the following days, Lucas came back. Without an appointment, without warning, he would pass by the stalls, buy fruit, sometimes a book, other times nothing. He would sit nearby, as if he didn't want to bother anyone, but he would stay, always with a kind gesture. A bag of ripe peaches, a jar of homemade honey, a wool blanket for the coldest nights. Ava never asked for anything, but she never refused either. One night he showed up with 3 warm empanadas and 2 cups of tea. He sat down next to the tent, on the ground, crossing his legs as if he were an old friend. Sophie ran over to him and showed him the new drawing. A house on clouds, with 3 windows and a sun with eyes. "This is me. This is Mommy." He pointed to 2 figures. "And this one is you. See? You look like the wind." "Like the wind?" He laughed, surprised. "Yes, because you don't make any noise, but you change things." Lucas looked at the drawing for a few seconds. His eyes filled with tears, but he looked away before Ava noticed. Each night, that improvised routine took shape. A picnic on the floor. A story told by Sophie. A comfortable silence shared between adults who had already lived too much. And without anyone saying it, something was being built there. Not a relationship, not a promise, but a bridge. Fragile, but real. Lucas, the contract man, was beginning to understand that not everything needed to be signed to have value. Sometimes, you just had to be present. Summer nights in Strasbourg had become different. The market, once just a tourist spot for Lucas, was now an expected destination. He no longer got lost among the stalls. On the contrary, he seemed to find himself in them. The routine he had created around Eva and Sophie was subtle, without exaggeration. Nothing excessive, just presence. He always arrived after sunset, carrying some unexpected gesture. Sliced apples with cinnamon, a small star-shaped lantern for the tent, a little book of illustrated fairy tales. Sophie welcomed him as if he were part of the scenery, without ceremony. She climbed on the stool, showed him her new drawings, and asked impossible questions. "Do you think clouds have a smell?" Or, "If a hug were an animal, what would it be?" Lucas, who had spent his life answering executives with pinpoint precision, found himself stumbling over answers that came from the heart, not logic. Ava watched everything carefully. There was no easy smile, no hasty intimacy. But her body was beginning to loosen up. She no longer flinched when Lucas approached. Sometimes she even offered him a crooked wooden chair to sit on. They talked about the weather, the market, the seasonal fruits. Simple things. But it was in this simplicity that the roots grew. On a particularly quiet night, Ava was arranging the necklaces when the elastic on one of them broke. The beads scattered across the floor. Lucas, who had just arrived with a bag of tangerines, knelt down without saying anything and began to pick them up one by one. Ava, surprised, hesitated. Then she did the same. The two of them stood there, in silence, picking up small colored beads as if reconstructing something too delicate to be rushed. When they finished, Lucas held out his hand, holding 3 blue beads in his palm. Those were missing. She took it, thanked him quietly, and for a second, their eyes met. A long second that needed no explanation. The next night, Lucas brought in a set of organizing jars. He left them on the table without saying anything. Eva looked at them, raised an eyebrow, and he just smiled. I thought it might help keep the bills in place. She didn't answer, but this time, she smiled back. And so, the small gestures continued. Lucas began to spread a towel on the ground beside the tent, creating a space where Sophie could draw more comfortably. He bought new colored pencils. He brought a book of illustrated stories in Old French. Once, he showed up with a basket of freshly baked bread, which he shared with the two of them in silence, while in the distance a musician played a melancholy song on the violin. Picnics on the floor became a ritual. Sophie would sit on her mother's lap, sometimes on Lucas's, and ask him to read aloud. He read slowly, with an accent, making mistakes in words, and making Eva laugh softly. But the girl loved it. And Eva began to see something there that she couldn't name. One night, when the tent was already being dismantled, Sophie fell asleep on the towel, with her arms wrapped around one of the drawings. Eva looked at her daughter, then at Lucas, who remained there, unhurried, as if time had agreed to stop for a while. She sleeps like this when she feels safe, Eva said, in a barely audible tone. Lucas didn't answer. He just pulled a light blanket from his backpack and carefully covered the girl. Then he sat down next to her, without saying anything else. It was there, in that shared stillness, that the bridge was formed. Lucas began to miss meetings that he would never have missed before. He canceled dinners, postponed appointments. His assistants didn't understand, but he didn't explain. He simply went, every night, to the same place where people didn't negotiate figures, but glances. Because there, among the fruits, drawings, and contained laughter, he began to understand what no spreadsheet had ever shown: the value of being present. Truly present. It was one of those nights when summer disguises itself as autumn. The breeze was cooler, and the cloud-laden sky hid the stars. The market stalls resisted with their warm lights, and the muffled music of a lone accordionist filled the spaces between the hurried footsteps. Lucas arrived earlier than usual. He was carrying a simple package in his hands, a wooden box carved with leaf designs, in which he had placed the new set of watercolor pencils he had found in a bookstore downtown. It wasn't an expensive gift, but it seemed like the right one. Sophie, as always, saw it first. "Mr. Warm!" she shouted, running to him, using the nickname she had created after a hug on an especially cold night. "Mom said you wouldn't come today because of the rain." "I promised I would come," she replied, handing him the box. "And promises are like roots. Even in the rain, they stay." Sophie opened it carefully, her eyes shining as she saw the colors arranged in rows. She screamed with joy, ran to Eva with the gift, and the two adults stood there face to face for a few seconds in silence. "She was talking about you earlier today," Eva said, fixing her hair that was messed up by the wind. "She said that when you're around, her nightmares go away." Lucas nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. There was a lump in his throat. It wasn't guilt or responsibility. It was something deeper, as if he was learning for the first time what it meant to be needed. Later, while Sophie drew under a blanket, Eva and Lucas sat side by side. They shared a hot soup he had brought in a thermos. Steam rose slowly, like a whisper between them. Eva looked at Lucas and said, "I don't know what you do when you're not here. I imagine your life is different." Lucas looked up at the cloud-covered sky, then at the market, which was slowing down as the night wore on. "Before, I thought so. That my life was important, full of meaning. Now I'm starting to think it was just noise." She looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "And the silence? Doesn't it scare you?" He smiled sideways. "Silence only scares us when we don't know what's inside it." It was at that moment that the past began to gain a voice. Lucas told us about his childhood, about the mansion in Munich that looked more like a mausoleum, about his strict father who never raised his voice, but who made his absence a cruel form of presence, about his mother who disappeared when he was still little, about the silent Christmases, the lonely dinners, the birthdays that were just another day on the calendar. Eva listened without interrupting. Her eyes didn't judge, they just welcomed. When he finished, she remained silent for a few moments, as if she were molding the words before delivering them. "I also grew up with silence, but of a different kind. A woman alone has to be strong and quiet. And after Sophie was born, I only knew how to survive, work, care, hide my tiredness." "And her father?" Lucas asked gently. Eva lowered her eyes. "He never knew. I didn't tell him. Not out of fear, but out of certainty. He was a tourist, like so many. It was just one night. When I found out I was pregnant, it was too late to try something I knew didn't exist." Lucas nodded. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. Sophie came over and sat between them, holding a new drawing in her hands. It was simple, with childish lines and disorganized colors, but there was something powerful about it. 3 figures under a smiling sun, holding hands. "That's our picnic today," the girl said. "Look, I even drew your crooked cap, Mr. Warm." They laughed. And for the first time, Eva couldn't contain herself. She lightly touched Lucas's arm and said, "She doesn't usually draw just anyone." And there, between confessions and colorful lines, a new form of love began to take shape. It wasn't the overwhelming love of novels. It was deeper, more shy. It was a love that was born from listening, from sharing, from presence. It was the beginning of a new story, written in silence, and illustrated by the hands of a child. The first heavy rain of the summer fell on a Wednesday evening. The market dispersed earlier than usual. The awnings fluttered in the wind. The street musicians hurriedly gathered up their instruments, and the lights flickered in the thick drizzle. Eva closed the stall with hurried movements, her brow furrowed and her fingers trembling. Sophie was not well. Since morning, the girl had a fever, cloudy eyes and rapid breathing. But by late afternoon, her condition worsened. She began to cough, her head felt heavy, her body begged for rest. Eva felt fear growing in her chest, but she tried to stay strong, as always. But this time she was not alone. Lucas appeared amidst the scattered crowd, his shirt wet from the rain, and his eyes alarmed when he saw them. He noticed it immediately. Sophie was lying on the blanket, pale, her eyes half closed, her lips dry. Eva tried to hide her despair, but she could no longer maintain the facade. "She has a high fever," he murmured, picking up the girl in his arms. "I need to take her to the hospital, but I don't have a car. The taxis are full because of the rain." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Come with me." Without another word, he took off his coat and wrapped Sophie gently in it. Eva followed him to the car parked a few meters away. The silence on the way there was heavy. The only thing that could be heard was the child's irregular breathing and the sound of the rain against the windshield. At the hospital, Lucas took the lead. He filled out forms, spoke to nurses, and called the pediatrician on duty. Eva held her daughter in her arms, but her face showed signs of exhaustion. For the first time, she let herself be held. Sophie was seen quickly. The diagnosis came shortly after. A mild respiratory infection, aggravated by exposure to the wind and a weakened immune system. She needed to be kept under observation that night. Intravenous medication, rest, and care. Lucas offered to stay with them. Eva wanted to refuse, out of pride, out of instinct, out of habit. But Lucas's gaze didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to be there. And for the first time, she wanted to not be alone. During the early hours of the morning, they took turns at the bedside. Sophie slept, still feverish, but peaceful. Lucas sat in the hard armchair next to the bed, quietly telling stories, drawing pictures with his hands on the white wall to distract the girl when she woke up crying. Eva watched in silence. There was something different about that man. It wasn't pity nor charity. It was a serene, firm, silent presence. He didn't try to solve everything, he just remained. When Eva went out for coffee, she found Lucas in the hallway, sitting with his head leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. But he wasn't sleeping. "You could have left," she said softly. "You've already done more than anyone else would." Lucas looked up, tired but alert. "I know what it's like to be sick and have no one by your side. I don't want her to feel that way, and neither do you." She was silent for a few seconds. "I never let anyone in. I've lost too much. I've trusted too much. I've broken too much. I didn't come to get in," he replied, his voice calm. "I just want to be where they let me be." Eva felt a tear fall, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of being seen crying. The next morning, Sophie woke up with more color in her face. She asked for porridge, laughed at Lucas's lame joke, and showed him the drawing she had started the night before, her and Mr. Warm under a red umbrella. Eva smiled when she saw the drawing. That was it. Lucas was not a hero. He was not a savior. He was the kind of man who, when faced with pain, did not run. He stayed. He held hands. And that was all. The days following her scare in the hospital brought a silent but profound change. Sophie was recovering well. She began to smile again, running between the market stalls with her colored pencils in hand and curious questions on the tip of her tongue. But there was something new in her routine, something more solid, more constant. Lucas. He was no longer just an occasional presence on Strasbourg's bright nights. Now he was always there. He arrived before the tent was even set up, helped to secure the cloths, set up the shelves with the necklaces, and offered Eva hot coffee before she could ask for it. Eva gradually stopped being surprised by his presence. She began to expect it. She began to count on it, even if she didn't say it out loud. Sophie, on the other hand, treated Lucas as a natural extension of her life. She called him Mr. Warm, with the same intimacy as someone who talks about the afternoon sun or the smell of fresh bread. She involved him in drawings, invited him to taste her clay cakes, and pulled him by the hand when she wanted to show him something special. One afternoon, Lucas arrived with a hardcover book. Sophie's Adventures in the Enchanted Forest. It wasn't a famous title. It was handmade, with a cloth cover and pages illustrated by local artists. Inside was a dedication. To Sophie, the girl who teaches adults how to hug for real. Sophie read it aloud, enchanted, then looked at Eva with shining eyes. "Mommy, it's my story." And in a way, it was. That evening, as the lights of the market reflected off the rain puddles, the three of them had an impromptu picnic of bread, fruit, and blueberry pie. They sat together under the canvas tent, sheltered from the wind that was beginning to herald the end of summer. Eva watched Lucas. He didn't say much. He didn't ask about the past. He didn't make promises. He just stayed. He helped fold the linens at the end of the night. He held Sophie in his lap when she dozed off, and he covered Eva's shoulders with his own coat when the temperature dropped. She was used to men who showed up, charmed her, and then disappeared. Men who spoke beautifully but didn't know how to listen. Lucas was different. He didn't try to impress. He offered something much rarer: time. Time to listen, to be there, to care. One late afternoon, While Sophie slept on top of a pile of blankets, Eva and Lucas sat side by side, their bare feet touching the still warm sidewalk. "You don't try to win Sophie over," Eva said, looking up at the sky that was beginning to turn golden. "I wouldn't know how," he replied with a calm smile. "But she trusts you. That doesn't happen easily with her. I think she recognizes what is true," he murmured. "And I've never had anything as true as this here." Eva stared at him, surprised by the vulnerability of his response. There was no game, no pretense, just a man, whole, before her. From then on, the days had become a repetition of small gestures that together formed something big. Lucas took Sophie to the park while Eva set up the tent. He taught her how to ride her bike, pushed her on the swing, and told her stories in a funny accent. Sometimes he would show up with ingredients to cook something simple at their house, always asking first, always respecting their limits. Sophie began to call him affectionately, without ceremony. "Mr. Warm, come see my castle. Mr. Warm, can I tell you a secret? Mr. Warm, I dreamed that we all lived together." Eva watched, always silent, but with her chest warmed by something that she still did not dare to name. Because Lucas was no longer a visitor. He was the man who had learned to offer what no one had ever given him: acceptance. And now, he gave it every day, without demanding anything in return. It was love, but a love that could not be announced in words. It happened day after day, in the silence of the hands that held, the eyes that stayed, the steps that returned. On a golden afternoon at the end of summer, the Strasbourg market seemed to breathe calm. The stalls were emptier, the voices were quieter, and the air carried that sweet smell of ripe fruit mixed with the damp earth after the recent rain. Sophie ran between the stalls, her face glowing and her hair blowing in the wind, holding a drawing in her small, paint-stained hands. She called out to her mother and Lucas, who walked slowly behind her, smiling. Eva stopped beside a nearby wooden bench, sitting down with a tired sigh as she watched her daughter tenderly. Lucas stood beside her, leaning against the back of the bench, his gaze calm but filled with something that seemed to have wanted to be said for a long time. It was Eva who broke the silence, her voice lower than the murmur of the market. "Lucas, I need to be honest with you." She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the horizon that disappeared between the trees. "I'm scared." Lucas looked at her, his eyes attentive and understanding. "Scared of what?" she asked, with the patience of someone who knows that some answers take time. "Of what might happen if you decide to leave. If this is all temporary." She gestured toward Sophie, toward the tent, toward the space they shared. "I don't want Sophie to suffer, to be heartbroken again, thinking that people who come here leave without warning." The confession hung in the air, heavy but true. Lucas took a step toward her, sitting down next to her, unhurriedly. "I understand your fear, Eva. I carry many of them myself. But I know that running away from them only makes them bigger. What I can promise is that I'm not here to play games of appearing and disappearing. I want to try to build something real, even if it's hard." She turned to him, her skin marked by time and struggle, but her eyes shining with the courage of someone who exposes herself. "I don't want empty promises, Lucas. I've heard too many. I want actions." He smiled, a simple, almost shy smile. "So let me show you." And that's exactly what he did. The following week, he entered Sophie in a children's art exhibition that was taking place in the city. He wanted the girl's talent to be recognized and to feel proud of what she created. He took Eva and Sophie to the cultural center, helped put up the paintings, and talked to other parents and artists. Sophie presented her drawing with a sparkle in her eyes. A new house with windows open to the sun, where 3 figures were embracing under a blue sky. One of them had the crooked cap of Mr. Warm. Eva watched him, moved, speechless. After that day, they sat in the park, the girl playing in the grass while the adults talked more lightly. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done," Eva said, letting out a sigh. But I wanted you to know that your place here is important to us. Lucas looked at Sophie running after a butterfly, and then at Eva, feeling that the barrier they both had was finally starting to give way. I've never been a father, he confessed, his gaze almost lost in his own words. But I want to try. For you, for her, for us. Eva didn't answer with words. Instead, she slowly stood up, walked over to him, and hugged him. A strong hug, full of everything that had been unsaid, of all the doubts and hopes. Sophie, who had been listening closely, ran into the hug too. And there, in that triple hug, something real was born. It wasn't a tale of princes and castles or grandiose promises. It was a construction made of small gestures, courage, and dedication. A new beginning. Eva looked at Lucas, her eyes filled with tears, and felt that finally, the word family could stop being a distant dream and become a real home. And Sophie, with a light heart, knew that that hug was everything she had ever wanted. Because sometimes, a hug can change everything. The love between Eva and Lucas grew slowly, like a tree that grows stronger with time, even though its roots began in arid soil. There was no rush, no labels. There were no dramatic declarations or grandiose promises, just the quiet, constant presence that they both began to value above all else. Lucas, who until recently believed that his world was made up of contracts, figures, and endless meetings, discovered beauty in the little things. The original origami arrangements he carefully left on Eva's kitchen table, the simple dishes he prepared for them, the way he arranged the tablecloth before meals. Everything became a gesture of care, a silent language of affection. Eva, who bore the scars of many battles, gradually learned to trust. It wasn't easy for her to make room in her heart, but Lucas's patient, unhurried way of doing things melted down the walls she had built to protect herself. The loneliness that had accompanied her for years began to transform into companionship. True companionship. Sophie, in turn, was the link that united those two worlds. At 6 years old and with the sensitivity of someone who lives in search of security, she accepted Lucas as a present and trustworthy figure. Not as a substitute for a father, because she knew that he was much more than that. He was someone who hugged her unconditionally, who laughed with her at the stories she made up, who dried her tears without rushing. On a cold afternoon, with a cloudy sky and a biting wind, Eva arrived home early and found Lucas setting the table for dinner. On the colorful tablecloth, origami birds and flowers were spread out in harmony. There was a soft aroma of herbs and spices in the air, and a hot broth sat in an old pot, ready to be served. She smiled, moved. "You always surprise me," she said, sitting down at the table. He smiled back, with that calm that only those who have found their place know how to have. "I'm not good with words, but I want you to feel that this is a home." Eva remained silent, too moved to respond. Later, when Sophie went to bed, Eva and Lucas sat on the porch, under the dim light of the street lamps. The silence between them was comfortable, like a blanket that warms without being too tight. "You know," Lucas began, looking at the timid stars that were appearing in the sky, "I never imagined that I could love like this, as a daily choice." She stared at him, her breath held. "Me neither," Eva confessed, her voice choked. He held her hand firmly. "I won't promise that we won't have any difficulties, but I promise to be here. Not just as someone who shows up, but as someone who stays." Eva felt that those words were worth more than any grand gesture. That night, she slept with her heart less heavy. For the first time, she felt that she could trust in something other than her own strength. The following days confirmed what they both already felt. Lucas's constant presence was not temporary. He became part of their routine, their home, their life. He worked from home, in a flexible routine that allowed him to spend more time with Eva and Sophie. He participated in simple tasks, shared laughter and silence, and cared for the girl with tenderness and respect. What was once a world of isolation, cold, and control was now filled with warmth, laughter, and accepted imperfections. Their relationship didn't need definitions to be real. It didn't need labels to be strong. It was love. A love born of patience, respect, and silent surrender. And that slowly transformed 3 lives into one. One sunny morning, while Sophie was playing in the garden, Ava watched Lucas open the car door for her with a shy smile and felt a certainty in her chest that she could not express in words. This was the family they had chosen to build. And in that moment, between the sound of their daughter's laughter and the calm of the garden, they all knew they were no longer alone. Because true love is not made of empty promises. It is made of presence. A year has passed since that first unexpected encounter at the Strasbourg night market, when a bright-eyed girl asked a stranger for something that changed everything: a hug. A year in which time, which seemed so impassive to Lucas Meyer, bent, folded, and created a space for what he never imagined he would experience. Lucas's life changed radically. For decades, he was a cold, methodical, and solitary businessman who owned a routine of high-rise apartments in Frankfurt. He left his huge penthouse in the city for the small house with a garden that Ava and Sophie called home. It was not an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. The change symbolized something bigger: the choice to be present, to build, to start over. The house was modest but full of love. The garden bloomed with vibrant colors, the fruit of Eva's careful hands, and she now taught art classes to children in the backyard, sharing her passion and resilience. Sophie, who had once drawn on a park bench, now attended the local first grade, her eyes curious and her smile open to the world. Lucas had adapted his work to his home, creating an office with a view of the trees and sunlight filtering through the leaves. His time was now divided between virtual meetings and precious moments with his new family. He had also found a way to connect even more with the local community, volunteering at a children's center, helping children who, like Sophie, needed support, affection, and hope. One sunny afternoon, at the end of a meeting, Lucas closed his computer and went out into the garden. There were Eva and Sophie, sitting on a checkered tablecloth, laughing and playing with paints and brushes. Sophie, with her small hands stained blue and yellow, proudly showed a canvas where she had painted 3 figures embracing under a sky of warm colors. Lucas came over and sat down next to them, and Sophie immediately held out her paint-stained hand to him. "Look, Daddy, this is our family," she said, with the innocence and certainty of children. Eva smiled and told Lucas, "That's what we are, a family." What once seemed impossible was now palpable, not because they had overcome all obstacles, but because they chose to be together, on the same path, with respect and silent love. That day, during dinner, Sophie made a statement that touched Lucas's heart deeply. "I asked for a hug at the supermarket, remember? But I gained a family." Lucas looked at Eva, then at his daughter, and felt an emotion that words could not express. The hug Sophie had asked for had been the beginning, the trigger for a transformation that involved everyone. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the sky that was beginning to turn pink. He thought about the past, about the loneliness he had carried for years, about old wounds, and smiled with renewed hope. Because in that simple house, with its imperfections and beauty, something much greater was born, a home with a lot of love and respect, a place where love didn't need to be perfect, just true. And when Lucas looked at Eva and Sophie, he knew that he had finally found what he had always been looking for, not in numbers or business, but in hugs, glances, and shared stories. It was the beginning of a new life, a life made of presence, dedication, and above all, love. And so ends this story that began with a simple hug, but which taught us that sometimes the smallest gesture can transform an entire life. If you felt that warm feeling in your chest, that desire to hug someone right now, you already know, spreading love never goes out of style. Now tell me in the comments, what was the moment that touched you the most in this story? I want to know everything. And look, if you want to continue receiving stories like this, full of emotion, twists and turns, and that warm feeling in your heart, don't waste any time. click that subscribe button, activate the bell so you don't miss anything, and of course, leave your like to strengthen our family here on the channel. After all, virtual hugs are also worth it, right? Thank you for being here, taking part in this journey with me. Until the next video, with more stories that will make your heart beat faster. Stay well, stay light, and remember, life is made up of simple moments that change everything. See you soon.